Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast with me, Ben Talon, illustrator and creativity coach, founder of the Creative Condition, artist and writer. I bring 20 years of creative industry experience and a lifelong love of creativity, a fundamental pillar of human happiness, to you through ongoing personal exploration and the shared experiences of others. You'll get a nourishing mix of creative industry professionals and people far and wide using creativity in ways that can take our learning to the next level so we can maximise our unique blend. The show's been supported from day one by Illustration X, a tremendous illustration agency representing a shining global roster of illustrators and animators over at illustrationx.com. The music for the show is by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on all good streaming services. And for everything else, for my coaching, resources and inspiration, head to thecreativecondition.com.
But there was also this idea of becoming sort of your own friend. And that, I think, was something that was quite revelatory for me, is that you can have this almost, you become your own taskmaster. You know, when there's that, you know, wondering whether you're a very driven person or whether you've kind of been dragged by this kind of need to prove how capable you are as a creative individual. And that kind of idea of getting active in your own rescue.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Creative Condition podcast with myself, Ben Talon, founder of the Creative Condition, host of the Creative Condition podcast, illustrator, artist, writer and overall storyteller. It's taken a while to whittle it down to storytelling, but that's what I do and that's who I am, and I'm with you today to bring you a fantastic new episode of this podcast. If you are new to the show, welcome. It's a joy to have you on board. I hope you enjoy what you find and I hope you learn more about creativity and the human condition and get plenty of ideas of how to shape and point yours. Joined by Owen Smith, one half of Abby and Owen, a wonderful visual storytelling studio out there, which we're going to get into more in a moment. Quick thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, illustrationx.com. You can check out their stunning range of global illustration and animation portfolios right now at illustrationx.com, along with their fantastic work supporting all of us in the creative industry. Been here for 11 years behind this show, which I cannot thank them for enough. Go and have a look what they're up to. I'd also like to thank Paradiso Institute, who recently came on board with the show following a blossoming relationship between myself and Marco Fan, who's helping me with some coaching training at agency level at the moment, putting together a new program, helping people to tell their stories so they can become the author of the life that they want to live. If you're interested in that, get in touch. I wrote Hector's autobiography, Hector Ayuso, co-founder, along with Marco. The reason you're doing it is Hector's kind of life experiences, his manifesto, the reason he's doing it. He's the founder of Paradiso Institute and also Off Festival, which went on last week in Barcelona. Hector stepped away a few years ago to work on Paradiso, a new challenge. But he is an absolute creative maverick. He's lived an intense life, which you can read about in that book, The Reason You're Doing It. We launched it at Paradiso Institute last year, and I was in love with the energy that these guys cultivated at the festival in Merida in Mexico. So I invited them to be a part of the show, which they are now, very thankfully. We're working together. Have a look if you want to jump on board with their idea of be crudo, be naked, be real. The thing is that there is not a lack of talent. New creative voices are emerging faster than ever, visible, influential, yet often unsupported. The idea is that they want to bring leadership to all the great studios around the world and get the next generation of bold, brave, creative new voices in this era of homogenization through automation and everything else that is creating this sea of sameness. So I'm very excited by the challenge. I'm delighted to be on board with them. Check them out at paradisoinstitute.org. And last but very not least, I'd love to give a plug to the Ukrainian Institute, who do an incredible job of supporting the embattled Ukrainian creative community, who continue to make bold, beautiful new work. And these guys are helping to get it out there, so you can join them in doing that. Share the work, commission them, just give them a few nice compliments. You know, they need it. ui.org.ua. So I hope you enjoyed the recent run of monologue shows. It's been an intense illustration spell of work for me here, along with my coaching practice. which has meant I've had to just hop on the microphone myself and take you in what's going on in this brain at any given moment. But today I'm back with a guest episode, and I'm joined by the wonderful Owen Smith. Owen is one half of Abby and Owen, who turn complex cultural and heritage stories into experiences people actually connect with. I mean, Owen is a visual storytelling studio. We work across heritage, culture and place, collaborating with councils, museums, cultural sites, heritage organisations and charities. We will help you turn complex stories into experiences that people refuse to walk past. So these guys are doing some stunning work, and Owen got in touch when I shared something about my recent suffering of anxiety and the stress and some of the tools that I've used to help me to shape that in a way that becomes beneficial or manageable at the very least. Now, Stoicism was one of the tools I've used to do that. I came across Marcus Aurelius's Meditations book while with close friend and previous guest on the show, Dan Kieran, who was the founder of Unbound Publishing in London, left some years ago to go and get back on with his writing and become an author again. And he said, that'll blow your mind. So I took the book and I read it, and it was incredible. 2,000 years ago, written by the only Roman emperor who was also a philosopher. And the lessons for living a life that is unburdened by the external is just seismic in its impact. And it's really helped me on a mental health level. So I posted something about this, and Owen got in touch saying, always delighted to see other people in the creative industry getting something out of Stoicism. Now, I've been listening to Ryan Holiday's The Daily Stoic podcast. I have the book that I dip into each morning for a little burst of wisdom, and it's incredible stuff, and it helps so much for a brain like mine, which has tendencies of so many things, leads to overthinking, bad nights of sleep, worry about the big things in life, stress about the lack of work. Now, Stoicism is about shining your light on the things you can control. And that's what we're going to get into today. We're going to talk about being active in your own rescue, which is a beautiful thing that Owen says during this chat. You might have heard in a little teaser at the start of the show. I hope you're going to enjoy it. I would love your feedback. Have you found Stoicism? If not, what do you make of it? Are you going to try and use it? I recommend that you do. It's a great tonic for our times. Have a listen. Let me know. I would love to get your feedback. I always do on this show, ben@bentalon.com. Happy to receive emails. If you would like to get into something more personal and work with me one-to-one on the coaching front, give me a shout and we can get into that also. Plenty of other resources at thecreativecondition.com. And if you want to work with me on the illustration front, bentalon.com, or head over to Illustration X and check out my 3 portfolios. You've got Talon Type, my hand lettering brand, Ben Talon Illustration, and you've got Ben Talon Live Event Drawing. So get in touch if any of those appeal. But without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Owen Smith from Abby and Owen.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this notion of, I don't know if you've heard of the idea of a live internet theory, because there's a lot of talk about this very sort of cynical perspective about how, you know, as things become more and more swamped with artificial intelligence and, you know, very kind of like a sort of flattened culture online, those instances of real kind of connection online feel fewer and far between. But there's actually, you know, there's a wealth of it there. You just have to look for it, and, you know, to actually be open to it, and to the opportunity of connecting with individuals that way.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I'm seeing a number of offshoots now. You know, small, almost like a reversion back to early internet forums and sort of more private communities. Like I'm part of the studio by Creative Boom that Katie Cowan runs, and you know,
Yeah.
it's just got these nice little kind of segregated areas. One called the water cooler, where people just chat and share what they're into. There's none of the politicized rah. It's kind of, you know, people are just sort of there to hang out and share if things are interested in, which is, I guess, what it started as, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. I think there's a danger when something becomes something that is very transactional, and, you know, it's almost as if you're engaging with it as a means to an end, as opposed to for the intrinsic value that's inherent in just having a chat with people, and, you know, having that curiosity mindset of, you know, actually this is exactly what I want to get out of this, is meeting interesting people and sharing ideas and just kind of playing about really with them.
Well, that's it. And as we all know, you know, opportunities sort of come organically from that, which is lovely. And it's not about necessarily going on there explicitly to get work, but it's, you know, that's a lovely thing about our world, isn't it? We, to some degree, I think creativity is an extension of self for most of us, it really depends what you're doing with it. But there's something lovely about that. I always joke and say I don't imagine that dentists are emailing each other, meeting up for coffee. Maybe they
Yeah,
are, and that would be quite
yeah,
interesting. But I love that about our world. Whenever I've moved to a new place, I'm quite open in kind of inviting people for a drink, and nine
yeah.
times out of 10 they kind of go, "Yeah, that's awesome. We're doing something that we both
For
interested in."
sure. I think there's definitely an importance to almost like finding your tribe of weirdos, especially I
Yeah,
think early on when you start, your first kind of forays into the creative world. Especially for myself, that was my experience of starting art college and being like, wow, you're feeling very at home very quickly because that's it. You've kind of found that sense of belonging and community. And yeah, I'm absolutely of a similar mind that for me, creativity and art in general should not be something that is opaque or is inaccessible. It should be a means of connecting with people. But above anything else, really, I think, if you share something and you put it out in the world, it is in order to connect with other beings. And so having that kind of mindset around it is, I think, a key part of our practice.
I think so, and I think it's been interesting post-COVID, especially to see that that took a little while to return. I was in Manchester at the time, and there was, quite a thriving networking scene at the time. A really good talk events, interesting speakers, run by people who were very passionate about creativity, and that was infectious in the room. And it took a good while, maybe into sort of maybe late 2022, early 2023, to start really seeing those events come back up. And I think that for obvious reasons, people have been more fearful since and kind of struggled to get back into that. But it really did feel like a lack, and I'm glad to see more local events seeming to come up again now.
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, I'm attending one in Manchester tomorrow, called Common Matters, which is a fantastic event. There's also one in London, but it's very much of that is the sort of ethos behind it, and it's something that I think I'm sort of late to the party. Really, it's actually something I hadn't really done very much of prior to COVID. In fact, so Abby and myself, we launched the partnership right on the kind of right on the precipice really of COVID's inception. And so it was the very start of our business. All of the interaction and the connections and collaborations that we were making were purely sort of online or virtual. So kind of getting into sort of dipping our toes into that. And again, as you say, everyone had been sort of instilled with an understandable kind of caution or reluctance around public events and those sorts of spaces. So, but yeah, I'm finding that to be really valuable. I mean, there's so much to be said for being in the room with someone as well.
Yeah, we can touch upon the studio in a minute, but I'd love to ask you about art college. Where did you study? And I'm interested in that as someone who shared that kind of lovely moment of crossing over from the subservience of school and feeling like I didn't particularly have an identity or fitting in, to finding this seemingly magical world of people wearing their own clothes and making interesting
Yeah.
things. Like, was that a similar experience, and where did that happen for you?
So I suppose interestingly, I came at it from almost the exact reverse, in that I was home educated by my parents, and they're both working class. My mum is she's a poet, and she recently found out actually herself that she's autistic, and me and my partner Abby are both neurodivergent, and my father was bipolar, and he was like an out of work psychologist. He was like had various health issues, and my older brother struggled a lot in school, so they ultimately made the decision to home educate, which was quite a dramatic thing to do. And it's only as an adult now that I realize how kind of unusual my upbringing was in that regard. So we were fully autonomously educated was the term, in that we were kind of allowed to kind of lead our own education, and that the things that we were interested in, we were allowed to just kind of read voraciously on that and explore it. And the thing that I was most interested in was art. I was just absolutely loved drawing. So my first experience of a classroom was at 16 years old, and I had no formal qualifications whatsoever. I didn't have any, zero GCSEs or anything like that. And it was at Stockport College, so just a stone's throw from Manchester. And it was the introductory diploma in art and design. So it was very much for people who didn't really have any formal qualifications at all. But what I did had was I had quite an extensive portfolio of my own sort of personal work and drawings, which I think really sort of swung things in my favor. And I'll always remember at the time the course leader, David Brind, was just very very sweet gentleman with a sort of, he had kind of a walrus's mustache, this really big white mustache. And I remember him saying that he'd give me a shot. And it was so strange to be in a structured environment, because I'd never had lesson plans before, and I'd never had kind of set expectations and deadlines of any kind, really. So to have or even just a loose brief set that I was going to apply myself to, was something that I kind of immediately, as daunting as it was, I guess I just sort of hit the ground running with it, because I didn't have any prior sort of conception of what a classroom was like, and whether, being really enthusiastic about work and about education, and, having a good relationship with the teachers and all of that stuff. It felt right, and it came very naturally to me. But I guess the real kind of finding community for me and sort of finding my tribe was following on from that. I did a national diploma in graphic design at the Northern School of Art, and that's actually where I met my partner Abby. So and we started sort of collaborating on stuff immediately, right from the outset, and just had that kind of straight away that we collaborated so well together. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that I had that. You mentioned the kind of slightly stifling experience of school, but I guess mine was the opposite end, and it was just so loose. There was no structure at all. So I actually thrived from having a little bit of structure from art college as well.
That's fascinating. Yeah, really. I have, I kind of look at homeschooling with a lot of, I don't have a, I don't understand it. Yeah, but it was polar opposite to me. So it's kind of, I'm with a very curious eye, and and I guess it really depends on the dynamic within families for how that works. But that is really interesting. Yeah, to come from no structure to structure is, yeah, I love that. Did you find that, were you aware of the lecturers responding to you in a different way because of that, or did you have a kind of self-initiative? Were you independent, I guess, in a way that might have been different to some of the students that expected more instruction?
Yeah, I think that was probably the thing that was most distinct, was that I as I say, that this sense of autonomy and kind of sort of following my own curiosity, that was something that I was kind of already doing, and that's how I'd kind of learnt previously anyway, and how I explored art in general. So it wasn't something that I felt like I was being made to do, or that I was kind of having these expectations put on me. It was just something that they were, I guess, steering a little bit, and it felt very conversational. Whereas it was a little bit alien to me to see the reluctance that I saw in some of the other students. And I think partly that was just because it being the course that it was, for a lot of people who had their reasons for not having any qualifications, and having struggles outside of college and at home. A lot of their kind of personal lives were very fraught, I think, as well. But I just had a really good relationship with my teachers, I guess, and what I really loved about it as well was that they weren't shy about introducing me to things. I had certain prior sort of ideas about, for instance, abstract art or impressionism, because I was very into like fine detail and realism drawing. And they kind of really opened my eyes to people like, Kandinsky, and, got me to kind of play around with things I'd never even really considered before, and really to see the value in it, and kind of it just sort of opened me up to exploring those things as well.
Well, it's a perfect marriage in a sense, isn't it? Natural curiosity and willingness to explore, met with a more experienced overseer. That's the dream,
Yeah,
isn't it? Really, for developing creativity.
yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree. I think that going into it with a curiosity mindset, almost, there's overlaps there with that kind of scientific approach as well, of being kind of not afraid to fail. It's about just kind of exploring and getting more data in the sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, very much so. And so the Abbey and Owen thing was a constant evolution from meeting there at the Northern School of Art.
Yeah, so it was, but when we met, it was called Cleveland College of Art and Design, and that was at the Middlesbrough campus. But yeah, we hit it off immediately, and I'll always remember. Technically, the first collaboration together was that the part of the course was that we got to set each other briefs, and they were just like really to kind of just warm us up to doing that, to setting briefs and approaching them. And I set Abby a brief to do a business card for a contract killer, who was kind of his cover was that he was a cleaner, and that he wore pink socks. That was his calling card. He was Mr. Pink Socks. And she just did this. It was so witty, and I absolutely loved the design. And I was like, I feel like there's something going on here where we just kind of get each other in how we work. But yeah, when we graduated, we both went into separate roles well, I went into a studio and she was an in-house designer. And that environment, it didn't quite click for us. And I think part of that was the fact that, we both neurodivergent, and I think we work a lot better when we're setting our own schedules and have a little bit more control over the work that we take on. So I think that was partly it, but also we missed kind of bouncing ideas off each other and working together. And we entered this competition to do a series of railway poster murals at Hartlepool train station. And we were working on that together, entering that competition every evening for a few weeks solid, and we were just having so much fun with it. And it just felt like, when a project just doesn't feel like there's any friction, that it feels like fun. It's not like a job. It almost was beside the point whether or not we got paid for it, or whether we were successful with that pitch, because it felt right. And we did win that competition, and then the business kind of grew organically off the back of that, because I think it was such a visible piece of work, with so many sort of trains passing through that station every day, and there was a little bit of like local coverage on it as well. And it really I think that really sowed the seed of the idea of us starting a business together. But it wasn't for a few years after that we actually kind of sort of jumped off the cliff in an attempt to sort of build our wings on the way down, as Ray Bradbury once put it. But yeah, I'm very glad that we did.
Yeah. And just tell us, before we get into the sort of Stoicism stuff we're going to talk about today, tell us a little bit about where you are today as a studio. I noticed there's quite a dominant role of illustration, which is interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, because funnily enough, we studied graphic design, but there's a heavy illustrative component to the work that we do. So yeah, we're a Teesside based creative duo, really. And Abby's always been sort of my partner in creativity and life. And we work together across a lot of public facing campaigns, and heavily focused on the community. And we've also worked on spatial design and a lot of exhibition work as well, alongside some brand work and illustrative projects. And that's been for both like small local and Teesside based organizations, as well as some internationally renowned businesses. And yeah, a lot of that work, it sits in this interesting space between sort of art and design and civic sort of civic space as well, because we work with a lot of councils, a lot of the sort of local councils in the Tees Valley, but also and charities, but also some of the councils for cities in the northeast as well. Um, and yeah, I mean, we actually started, as I mentioned, we started the partnership right as COVID happened, and so we'd kind of lined up quite a lot of work from sort of shared clients and connections, and that just kind of fell off the face of the earth as soon as COVID hit, because we do a lot of mural work
I
and
was
a lot
going to
of kind of
say, yeah, with that front-facing stuff.
that's it. So we kind of had to find a way to make it work. It was, just one of those things where it's sink or swim, I guess. And at the time, we were spending a lot of our time going for walks in the Tees Valley, just for our mental health, really, and just to kind of so we didn't end up, completely, goblins in front of the PlayStation, and started really connecting with the local area and seeing how beautiful it was actually, because we couldn't really travel further afield, and it kind of the this idea came to us that we're probably not the only people feeling that way, and something we could do that was in our control was to celebrate the local area and to create some artwork that was representing it and representing those spaces. So we started an online print shop selling artwork, sort of celebrating and representing the Tees Valley, and that really became a bit of a lifeline for us financially and gave us something to focus on. And then we started to some client work started to come off the back of that. But there was also strangely instances where, the crisis of COVID actually resulted in it presented us with opportunities to actually support the local community. So we one of the first sort of projects that we worked on together as a partnership was the COVID campaign for Stockton-on-Tees. So we did all of the kind of the safety messaging for the town, and it was we just approached it from a totally different angle, because we were both feeling a lot of anxiety around COVID, and we knew everyone around us was. So we wanted to kind of avoid taking that approach, because we'd read all of these things about how ineffective that kind of the scare tactics that you get on like cigarette packets is, that it just makes people want to look away, or worse still, it makes them go, oh, do you know what? I need a cigarette. So we were like,
Yeah.
I don't think leaning into the fear here is what we need. It needs to feel friendly and approachable, and to find a kind of, even like a child friendly form of messaging for this campaign. And I think that was something that we were really grateful for, was that even in kind of that moment of crisis, it was presenting itself with opportunities for us to kind of apply sort of creative problem solving, and to kind of get stuck in and kind of support the community locally as well.
I love that. It's beautiful. And I think that it would be interesting one day to curate some kind of exhibition of the creative work that emerged at that time, because I think it created necessary pivots for people, but it also mined something deeper within people that they just wouldn't have had time to access in other circumstances.
Yeah.
I remember, that Micah Purnell, a good friend of mine in Manchester, who I shared a studio with for a while, does these beautiful, big, bold typographic statements. And he grew up in a very Catholic family. And so he was exposed to these kind of biblical quotes, which were quite profound. And then just a natural interest in letter forms. He says he has this memory of
Yeah.
kind of playing around with alphabetic spaghetti and making his name out of it, and taking, great care to make sure all the letters were lined up, and a really interesting collision there. But he did this beautiful kind of on the side of a high rise in Manchester, just said kindness at its proper level. And it was beautiful, because there was this kind of groundswell of community that happened because people had that scarcity going on, and we all were a bit scared. So it was, you had neighbours checking in on, where we were in Manchester at the time, an old guy across the road who lived on his own. We all put together a hamper, and made sure it got to him around Christmas time, and little things like that, which were really beautiful. So to hear that story is another great instance of responding to that adversity in such a positive way, which is what we need in times of crisis. And I think ultimately what humans can be really good at.
I completely agree. And I think it's that thing as well that it just generally, with any sort of creative output, limitations are often, they kind of, they hone you in and they refine what you're doing. And I think sometimes those limitations are self-imposed, and sometimes they're imposed by reality. You
Hmm.
know, like a worldwide pandemic. But it's so interesting to see what people do under those limitations, and how they kind of still find a way for that spark to come across and to connect with people. And it's even more important to do so in those instances. But just to go back to what you were saying as well about your friend with that interesting kind of confluence between that religious typography and using that in a new way. I think that cross pollination is always interesting, and I think there's so many instances of that where it's really just the collision between two seemingly disparate or unconnected things will create something that feels really vibrant and new.
Yeah, I'm forever interested in that, and joining those dots gives me great pleasure, not only in my own work and my own world, but it's now starting to emerge in the coaching practice. I've had some shocking night's sleeps after each of the coaching sessions I've done recently, and I need to get better at policing my excitement, because I get so fired up in the sessions, and when a person's story starts to unfold, and then hearing what they're trying to strive for, and I see something that they might not even have thought about, and start throwing these wild ideas together, and then they get excited and I get more excited, and I'm sat there wired on the train back down to Salisbury
Yeah.
from London, and
Mhm.
but it's lovely, and that's really what, when you boil creativity down, that's what it is, isn't it? It's taking the existing bank of knowledge and lived experience and smashing that together with something completely, like you said, disparate or new.
Yeah, that's it. I think sometimes people get very caught up on the idea of doing something that is, has in no way ever been seen before, and it's much more about kind of, playing with those elements and kind of doing a little bit of alchemy, really.
Hmm.
And all work is going to in some way be informed by the things that inspire you, by your own influences, and the things, whether they were early influences or things that you're getting fired up about in the, this week or in the moment. But yeah, I'm completely with you about trying to, having those moments where you actually need to rein in your excitement and kind of uh, refine it into something a little bit more focused.
Yeah, I often use the analogy of Cyclops from the X-Men without his visor on, and the
Oh
the
yeah,
lasers just go
absolutely.
everywhere. You need the goggles to sort of, yeah, just to direct that.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I often talk about the difference between having like the spotlight on, like the floodlights on, or spotlight, and it's being able to kind of, sometimes you need both, but it's being able to actually press a button and switch between the two isn't always so easy. But it's part of what makes you, I think that's part of being like a creative practitioner of any kind, really.
I think so. And just as a last point on that, I think that actually something you said there is lovely about having not noticed the kind of the gravity of the natural beauty and the local beauty going on there. And I've been reading a lot of things recently, and through my own kind of period of anxiety, which is interestingly what led me to the Stoicism, which has led us to this conversation. Um, it's I've been doing a lot of reading up around about slowing down, trying to find ways in my life to slow down and not be all consumed by that pressure to keep making money through freelance, even though we need to. It's about structuring my business in a way that invites that opportunity without completely just rolling myself over with overwhelm, which we're all very familiar of in the pace of today's world. And in some ways, you could look at it as being a sad thing that it took a pandemic for us, a lot of us, to slow down and take a pause. Same time, we, like you said, there's something accidental about that, and it is kind of a necessity sometimes. But I just think it's lovely that happened, and that kind of twist and that pivot in your own business happened by slowing down and looking around. And I think it's a lesson for all of us that, despite all these wonderful tools that we have access to connect with each other, I think we need deeper thinking and slower pace of things for creativity
Absolutely.
to truly flourish.
Yeah, I'm actually really interested in it. I recently read it. It was it's called the Slow Media Manifesto, and it was a document. I think it was written up in sort of the early 2000s, and even then, I think there was a sense that the kind of pace of life and sort of productive output was having a negative impact on people's sort of well-being and ability to do that kind of deep work. I know that's the term sort of Cal Newport uses in the title of one of his books, but yeah, I very much feel that myself. And and that pressure as well to kind of, there's this efficiency trap, which happens when the better you kind of, the better you get at fulfilling client projects and organizing your business and your day-to-day life, the conveyor belt just sort of speeds up, because I can take on twice as much client work as I could 2 years ago, and I've got more time to fit in a personal project here, and we don't have an unlimited capacity to do these things. We only have a limited amount of energy, and most importantly, we only have a limited amount of time. We're finite, and so just kind of reminding ourselves of that and slowing down and being more selective is something that I think that's very much where I'm at right now as well, because that's something I very much struggle to switch off. And when I get excited about a new project that comes in, I can almost sort of not even stop to consider where will I actually fit this in, both time wise and in terms of energy wise. So yeah, I'm totally of a similar mind to you right now about
Yeah.
kind of slowing down in that sense.
And can I ask, with the neurodivergence, is that something that you have to be aware of too?
Yeah, I think it's been having that self-knowledge has been totally invaluable for myself and for Abby, and that it's something that is such an integral part of how we work and of the type of work that we do and the way that we structure our creative life. But it can be a bit of a double-edged sword sometimes as well, because it's like I it's almost like I'm driven by an internal motor. I think that's something about ADHD is such a terrible name for the condition, because it's not a deficit of attention. It's almost like an abundance of it and not always being able to direct it. So I can get deeply invested in and focused on something and not really be paying attention to my battery there. So yeah, I think it's something that we have to be very mindful of, and do actively structure our working life and sort of our day-to-day life around. And I think for the better as well. I think that self-knowledge in general is always useful, but having that kind of that language and that kind of toolkit to apply has been really helpful for us both.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's really interesting and makes a lot of sense. And I think that we can all learn from that. And I also think, my own personal kind of struggle recently, you're absolutely right, self-knowledge. And I have to be careful not to go completely down the rabbit hole of just living my life through podcasts about psychology and, and anxiety and whatever else. But actually, what a blessing to have access to this great knowledge from professional people that maybe 20 years ago I would have had to seek out, in areas where I wouldn't have known where to start. But that awareness of just things like willful tolerance, as in it's okay to feel anxiety and you will come through this, and retraining your brain to acknowledge that, as opposed to the fear of the fear itself. Things like
Yes,
that have
yeah,
been a game
absolutely.
changer for me.
Yeah, totally. I think that even just a base level understanding of you know psychology, of mental health, of therapeutic tools is something that is helpful for anyone and everyone, regardless of sort of the area of work that they're in. And I think especially in yeah, as a self-employed individual and someone who's interfacing with their own clients, it's really important to have that kind of understanding of, how relationships work on kind of a deeper level. Because, when I'm always fascinated by the fact that we can tell right away whether or not a client is a good fit for us. It's one of those things where that kind of chemistry is there, and you either really feel like you can get behind the work, or it's something that's not quite aligned. And I think it's helpful to be able to spot sometimes why that is, rather than it just be, on an intuitive level. But something that we've noticed is that the relationships that work best and turn into long-standing collaborations are the ones where there is a mutual respect, and there's also a kind of a kind of grown up adult to adult thing going on there, rather than sometimes someone will come in with a project and it's almost like they see themselves as, I'm the boss and you're the worker, or I'm the parent and you're the child. And then you have the flip side where you have clients who'll come in and they're almost expecting to be, they're like almost, there's a level of kind of parentizing happening there, that that there's a level of them that maybe they haven't got a brief formed and they haven't got any deadlines in place and things, and there's almost a sense of needing to kind of manage them a little bit more than we'd maybe expect. And I think that it's been helpful we're interested in a form of psychotherapy called transactional analysis, which talks very much about that and about being kind of on that sense of like mutual respect and seeing kind of intrinsic value in the individual that you're working with. And I think that's been really helpful for me just in life, but also very much so as kind of in my business as well.
Yeah, those lovely first meetings where it just feels aligned and you're all kind of on the same page is great, isn't it? And it just helps
Yeah.
things get off the ground. Let's talk about the role of Stoicism then, because this is how we initially connected. I'd shared a post about working through a personally tough time and this school of thought. I mean, tell me about your relationship with it when you first encountered it and your sort of understanding of it, if you would.
Yeah. So it actually, funnily enough, I encountered it at a particularly difficult time. I'd been working for a design agency for about 3 years, and I'd ended up sort of a design director of the company, and it was I'd kind of hit a point where I realized that I didn't feel particularly invested in the work anymore, and I didn't feel like I was really on the same page as the other people in the company, and was feeling a little bit lost, I suppose. And I encountered this idea of the trichotomy of control, which was this Stoic idea of you've got the things that are fully in your control, and you've got the things that are entirely outside of your control, and then you've got these things that sit somewhere in between. And really kind of having that honest conversation with myself about, well, I don't have to stay here. I don't have to, it's in fact fully in my control whether or not I stay here or whether I change things completely. And really, it helped me see how much agency I had in that moment, and that it almost kind of empowered me in that moment, I think, to do something about my situation. That's when I had the conversation with Abby about, actually, I think we've always wanted to work together. And at the time, Abby had started her freelance practice and was getting to a point where she was sort of struggling to manage that workload on her own. And it just kind of all seemed to slot into place, like, well, this is the perfect moment actually for us to give this a go. And I think because I'd found that so useful, I started to explore, well, what other practical tools are there in Stoicism, because that had been so helpful. And I think that's one of the things that I find so wonderful about Stoicism is it really is a practical philosophy. It's a set of tools that it's in essence a very early form of cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's just kind of astonishing how it has been able to withstand the test of time as it has, and that those ideas are just as fresh and as useful today as they were when they were first written.
Oh, it could have been. I was stunned by that. It was my kind of connection with it was that I'm friends with a guy called Dan Kieran who lives on the next street here in Salisbury, and we met through the local dog walk. And Dan founded and ran Unbound, the publisher in London, for 10 years. And he just stepped away from that business when I met him. And he's a very, deep wisdom loving guy. He's very philosophical in his personality, a lovely, lovely bloke, always full of interesting stories. And we had toddlers at the time. So on my dad day on a Monday when I had the kids all day, we'd got a little sing along groups and all that kind of stuff, which is quite comical. And then one time we just went to Waterstones, like the kids run around upstairs, and he ended up pulling meditations off a shelf and handing it to me, saying, "That'll blow your mind. and I just sort of looked at it and I bought it there and then because I just trust Dan's curation and his love of these things. And I didn't read it for about 3 years. And then when I started to feel, going on this kind of anxious spell, I picked it up off the shelf and started reading it one night. And I couldn't believe that I was reading stuff from 2000 years ago, it could have been written in that moment. I mean, it's so pertinent in today's world with everything we have to manage mentally and information wise.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's particularly astonishing because this is, Marcus Aurelius was writing that to himself. This was his personal journal. So it's and one of the Stoic principles is kind of strict with oneself and lenient with others, and you really sense that in that writing that he's kind of interrogating himself a little bit at times. But there was also this idea of becoming sort of your own friend. And that I think was something that was quite revelatory for me, is that you can have this almost, you become your own taskmaster, when there's that, wondering whether you're a very driven person or whether you've kind of been dragged by this kind of need to prove how capable you are as a creative individual. And that kind of idea of getting active in your own rescue is how Marcus Aurelius put it. And I absolutely love that, because it really, again, it's this sense that, you're very much, able to change your situation in many, many instances, and to support yourself through that. But, there's such a wealth of these kind of intuitive tools that can kind of, in an instant, make the situation better, whatever it is. I was walking along with my youngest brother Theo, just the other day, and it had been raining quite heavily, and I was only wearing my running trainers, and stepped in this huge puddle. And just as I went to kind of kick off about it, he was like, "Don't add to first impressions," which was something I say to him all the time, which the Stoic philosopher Seneca said, which was that, the impression here is, I stepped in a puddle. I don't need to add to that first impression, which means my feet are wet, which means I'm uncomfortable, which means I'm going to have a horrible walk home. Like that, I don't need to add any of that. And then it just became kind of funny immediately, because it was like, yeah, I mean, there's nothing really wrong with the fact that my feet are wet right now. It's if anything, it's an unusual experience, but it doesn't have to be negative, And it's just these really intuitive little kind of thinking tools that can just help so quickly in the moment. And that's, I think, why there's a lot of parallels to cognitive behavioral therapy there.
I think you're absolutely right. And I bought Ryan Holiday's Daily Stoic with some Waterstones vouchers I was given at Christmas. And it's wonderful, and the description in his introduction that I wrote down here is it's about our perception of things rather than the things themselves that cause most of our trouble. And it's kind of profound and so true. And like you said, it's that unwillingness to allow the futile anger in when these kind of trivial things, dropping a glass in the kitchen or, standing in dog dirt, any of the things. But also to go to the opposite end of the scale. I'm 42 now, and I'm quite happy to admit I'm in the midst of a full-blown midlife crisis. It's like having all the thoughts around mortality and all the big stuff that is wildly out of my control. Yet at the same time, I still feel it. But actually, in meditations, Marcus talks about, just imagining the eons of time that preceded our existence in this moment and the stretch of time that will happen after that. And it's almost comforting in a strange way,
Yeah, absolutely.
It just gives you this almost cosmic expanse mentally, as well as the visual that conjures. And that has been quite helpful to me, in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on it, I think I had my sort of midlife crisis early. It was sort of as I was turning 30, I had this. I put so much pressure on myself, sort of in the build-up of things that I wanted to achieve and things I wanted to do beforehand. And I mean, I read this study that mortality rates for young men spikes just before they turn 30 for the same reason, because they start going, I need, I want to go on this dramatic adventure, or I want to, maybe have one last blowout and things like that. And it kind of, I even sensed to a small degree that in myself of feeling like I needed to prove something, or, before I turned 30. And reading Stoic philosophy, there is this sense of kind of relaxing into the reality of your own finitude, that you can't and you won't do everything that you would like to do, and that is the natural state of things. And yeah, I think looking at the bigger picture is a big part of Stoic philosophy, in the sense that they they talk about preferred indifference, which is this idea that there are things that we treat from a place of extreme mattering, as if that it would be the end of the world if things didn't turn out a particular way, and just kind of loosening your grip a little bit on those things and saying, actually, it's a preference, but it's not actually that in the scheme of things. If you look, especially if you look at it, the gradient of all of time, it doesn't actually matter one jot whether or not you're late for this meeting, or whether there was a typo in that email, or whether the client hated that concept. So yeah, that can be really helpful. But there's also this I wanted to get away from this feeling of getting through stuff, because when I first came to graphic design and commercial illustration, it was just pure fun. It didn't even occur to me that at some point that would feel like there'd be instances where it felt like work, or like even like something that I wanted to get through and get out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this kind of moment where you go, well, I don't want to be in a place where I'm just trying to get through my life. It's, in fact, ultimately, when you boil it down, this creative work, it's problem solving, and problem solving is kind of the stuff that life is made of. And there's never going to be no more problems. That's the stuff that life is comprised of. So having that mindset of just trying to get through it is something that is it's just not tenable, and it's certainly not like a cheery way to approach your work. So yeah, I think there's definitely a sense of kind of loosening your grip a little bit on needing things to turn out a particular way, because that's just it's an argument with reality, really. Things are going to unfold as they do so much of the time.
It is, and it's about, yeah, like you said, it's that radical acceptance of stepping off and finding the joy and curiosity in seeing what unfolds as well. Because I don't know about you, but I mean, you mentioned one kind of twist in your own story with the COVID experience. Nobody was predicting that, and I've been through this recently with, I think as far as Stoicism, it's got a great use when it comes to the kind of the daily trauma of what we do, as in where's the next job coming from, and like you said, what if that deadline starts to become intimidating, all those little things. It's a great framework for that. But I also find that the biggest joys I've had in my career and the most unexpected triumphs, this podcast included, I just, it wasn't on the radar until somebody in my world suggested it in response to something else I had in mind, and then went, oh, well, that's interesting. I just happen to be listening to about 20 podcasts a week. So, and I like talking and I love creativity. So, okay, let's give this a go. And we live at a time when we've got access to this technology and these tools where you can learn really quickly, and and that's beautiful. Whereas if you're going through, like you said, trying to just get through, and you've got this preconceived notion of things have to be this certain way, you're blind to what's around.
Absolutely. I really yeah, I couldn't agree more about the sense that everything that matters to me, and everything that has sort of the building blocks of my life, the vast majority of them were entirely unplanned. They were things that, again, that the competition that Abby and me entered to do the railway murals, I had never entertained the idea of being a mural artist, and now this is such an integral part of our practice. And the same with exhibition design, and that's something that we effectively gave it a go, and really kind of hit the ground running with it, and it's just, again, it's become sort of a key part of our practice. Same with map illustration and map design. And I think it was not deciding we're a particular type of creative, and it's a particular type of work. And it's kind of the opposite to, you hear a lot about niching down and having a very specific approach to things. And I think there's a lot of merit to that, and that can certainly work for a lot of people. But there's a lot of merit to the opposite as well, as being very open to the possibility that there might be some cross-pollination between all these things, and they might actually almost work like a balancing system and inform each other, you know? Yeah, and again, the same with relationships. I mean, I met Abby by chance because we were on the same course together. My best friend, one of my very dearest friends, I met him in a pub garden underneath a mural that Abby and me had recently produced. And he overheard me and my brother having a conversation about the mural, and we just got chatting. And bizarrely, we both had a copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations on us, like at the time, which was
Love that.
such one of those really freaky coincidences. And it was you just when you just know, oh, we're going to be friends, just right off the bat. And again, total chance. If you're not been in that pub garden at that exact time and he hadn't overheard that conversation, and being open to that, like you say, having kind of
Mm.
that stance, that kind of conversational relationship with life, I think is the way to go, really.
Yeah, a fantastic story, and I think that I've seen so many instances of whatever you want to term it. Call it serendipity. I have a friend who calls it the weave. I've heard invisible hands. Joseph Campbell uses a term for just that sense of underlying fabric and what feels completely random. I think only happens when we are open-eyed and open-minded and curious and willing to bring in this Stoic philosophy of, the idea of not why me, but what for, you know?
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I think that's the term that they used was living in accordance with your nature. And I think sometimes people think that means, oh, well, just doing what comes naturally to me. So, that might be the path of least resistance. It might just be, sitting in front of the PlayStation. But it's more a case of saying what is in our nature as human beings. Ultimately, we're social animals and we're curious animals, and we're here for each other. And it's kind of leaning into that, really. And I think that openness and that curiosity and that's a key part of what we are, really kind of in the marrow of our bones.
I think so. And I think there's also, we should all be carrying our sort of current book around or our favorite book
Yeah,
as well,
yeah,
It's,
absolutely.
it's an
Yeah,
expression
for
of
sure.
interest, isn't it? And where you are. And, wherever I look around in the house, there'll be this kind of skew with pile of 3 or 4 books that I'm simultaneously flicking
Yeah.
through. And I love that it's something about books whispering to you at a certain time that I was discussing this with a friend recently, how, you might look at a bookshelf that you've seen 1,000 times in your front room, but on that one day, one book will speak to you. And if you pull it off the shelf and look what's inside, you can guarantee you'll land on something that's somehow relevant to what you're going through.
Yeah, completely. I think Rick Rubin talks about this in his book, is it Creativity or The Creative Act, which is just a fabulous book. And he talks about it's almost like a form of divination, and not in
Yeah.
a kind of woo-woo or kind of superstitious way, but just that there's a way that I think it will steer us or steer our thinking in a really intuitive way. And sometimes you just need an injection of something different, like a different vantage point or a different perspective. And often it will feel like it comes at exactly the right time. And I think that especially when it comes to kind of solving creative problems, you kind of need to go away and kind of, it's a really difficult thing to do, to kind of accept the uncertainty and the insecurity of not knowing how you're going to solve a particular brief, and knowing that what you need to do in order to figure it out is to almost put it on the back burner and go and read something or listen to an album or go for a walk or have a chat with a friend. And it's there's a sense, I like that term you use, the weave or the invisible hand. It's almost I think that's your intuition. There's something that's happening on a sort of non-conscious level, and that's where a lot of that creative, like, heavy lifting is being done. And then it just seems to sort of pop up out of nowhere. There's the answer. That's what I need to do. And you have that lovely kind of light bulb moment. But you need that time for it to kind of, that idea to kind of take root and that's happening sort of below the surface level.
Yes, and we forget that. And it goes back to what you said about mental batteries earlier as well. We have to make and schedule time to be actively, I don't know if bored's the right word, or just vacant or just present, but, to be without mental burden, I suppose. We're not scrolling a phone, not watching the telly, and there's just something about just sitting and allowing yourself. I think they say it's about 15 minutes before we start to access the default mode network, which is where that deeper thinking and intuition kind of happens, which is fascinating. And there's this, when I was researching my second book, The Creative Condition, there's a very high number of Nobel Prize winners where their breakthrough idea either came upon waking from a dream, in a dream, or while dozing off to sleep, and it speaks for itself.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I think that's something that's so, I'm by no means a Luddite, and a lot of the work that we do is, using current technology. But I do think there's something particularly fraught and almost sort of sinister about the way that smartphones will just kind of delete that time. They're almost like this little portal, this kind of amulet that you're carrying about, and it's so easy to not recognize what you're missing, and because it's so easy. It's just right there. It's in your pocket, and I think I have one of the most sort of embarrassing phones at the moment. I've got this little flip phone. It's just like a little feature phone, and the amount of kind of creative dreaming space that I feel like I've managed to claw back so quickly by making that shift. And yeah, do you know what? It's a pain in the ass sometimes. I won't pretend it's not, but it's also created these moments of human connection that weren't there before. Like when I go to sign in at the gym, I can't scan in like I normally would because I can't get the app on my phone, and it means I get buzzed in by the staff and I have a chat with them, and I hadn't spoken to them before. And I've been going to that gym for a year, and there's so many instances like that where it's like that little conversation or that moment of connection can be you know, the inception point for a new idea, or just just give you the little boost that you actually need on that day.
Yeah, and just preserve that battery as well. We're in a mental health crisis, and I think that the technology is playing a massive part. How could it not be when it's so designed to capture our attention and so well financed? But also, and what's this is again, this is joining all these dots now. But I'm currently listening to the Lord of the Rings audiobook. I was obsessed with it when the films came out, read the books, but I haven't read the book since. So it's a lovely kind of escape. It's read by Andy Serkis, and but as you said that, I suddenly thought about the power, the how the ring is written in that story and how it consumes its
Yeah,
owner's mind, and it's
yeah,
Gollum
absolutely.
constantly on it all the and for even Frodo kind of wanting to wear the ring despite cautions not to, and the way it tempts Sam, and there's something very relevant about that when compared to smartphones today.
Yeah, totally, totally there is. And I think it's almost like there's an allegory there of the the way that there's an addictive component. Of course there is. I mean, smartphone addiction is, a well documented thing. And I think there's that kind of whispering to you and kind of calling you. And it's that very fact that anything that offers instantaneous gratification is often, bad for you in the long term. And it's the things that you're talking about, slowing down the pace of life. And I think there is a kind of deeper and richer satisfaction that comes from, the fruits of those efforts, where it's a case of allowing something to slowly grow and develop rather than needing that instantaneous satisfaction. And I mean, running your own business is a huge lesson in that, because you've really, you've got to get past those initial kind of anxieties and that this kind of valley of disappointment where you're like, I'm putting all this work in, but I'm not really seeing anything from it, and just that kind of quiet trust and leaning into the fact that it's going to take a bit of time and patience, and certainly a bit of luck as well. But I do think that there is that certain technologies and instant gratification is kind of an enemy to that way of being. And I think trying to limit how much of it you have in your life can only be a good thing, really.
I think so. not to go too far down that road, but I have heard, on a number of psychology podcasts, the idea of this constant feed of dopamine, like any addiction, the highs get lower as it progresses, and then it removes your ability to take the same satisfaction and dopamine from more wholesome pursuits. The small things in your life you completely overlook because you're looking for the next big shareable thrill, and it's this descent
Yeah.
into almost surface level behaviors.
Yeah, I absolutely, and I think that there's something again going back to like physical books. There's something about the tactile, kind of tangible, and almost like there's a ritual to it as well, which is something that I think that we're um, so lacking in culturally so much of the time with a very little kind of so we develop our own little personal rituals, and for me that is reading. I've never quite I have a lot of friends and family who really enjoy e-readers, but there's something uniquely special for me about having a physical book in your hands and noticing how quickly you can lose the kind of the knack or even the skill of reading and sticking with it if you've spent a lot of time playing video games or on your phone. It's almost like you start to expect things to kind of just be kind of fed to you passively rather than having to, engage yourself imaginatively in that way. But yeah, again, for danger of sounding like a total Luddite there, but
No, I'm very much trying to go more that way, and I'm even considering handwritten letters now for a sort of new thing that a new coaching thing that I'm trying to do, and to really
yeah,
go double down on the personal touch and more coffees and I just think it gives me on a very personal individual level. I just enjoy it more, I just like the interaction.
yeah. Well, I think it's interesting as well, when you think about handwriting, you I think you think at a different pace because when you type, it's so instant. When I stop and I have to write by hand, whether it's journaling or it's sometimes I'll send postcards because part of mine and Abby's an aspect of the business is the online shop that we have, and we sell postcards. So I've recently started writing and sending out postcards myself, and I've noticed that there's there's time between starting to form the shapes of the letters and actually writing the sentence out. There's more time to think about where I want that sentence to go. And I'm like, I think I'm wittier writing by hand than I am typing because I'm thinking about it, and it's that slower. There's a slower pace to it, and it's a little bit more intentional. And also, there's that sense of permanence there that you don't get with, because you can just go back and rewrite and delete and rewrite, and it's that kind of there's no undo, which I quite
Yeah,
like about it as well.
that's lovely. Yeah, and just that, how lovely to receive something that someone's taken the time to write just to you. And has that physically taken also the time and energy and the cost to physically send that to someone?
Yeah, for sure. And I think even now, I'm very mindful of not because I could waffle just infinitely about AI. And I thought, but just to touch on it briefly, I think that's the human touch and the being such a sort of tangible humanity in something is more valuable than ever now because there's certain things that are just so uniquely human and people really respond to that. And I'm confident that that's something that is that that is going to continue to be the case. And so I guess there's been a little bit of that for me as well, of saying, I actually want to do some of my early concept work, sketching on paper rather than doing it in, Photoshop or Procreate, and really enjoying that process and doing it at a slightly slower pace and having that kind of that physical kind of even, you know, just really kind of bare bones kind of human experience.
Yeah, very much so. I think it's always going to have a place, and as you say, I agree. I think it's going to heighten its value. To sort of put a bow on this, I thought a nice way to kind of, we're in this moment where there is a lot of fear, there's a lot of panic. The pace of life feels very out of control almost. Particularly, if you spend a lot of time online on kind of social networks and the likes. Thinking of Stoicism, what would you suggest to someone who's maybe either discovering it for the first time in this conversation or is very new to it? Like, do you think that as a vehicle and that as teachings is relevant for this moment? And where would you suggest a starting point for someone who who, could benefit from that, who maybe feels a little pessimistic about the way forward or the way things are changing around them?
I think that's a really, really good question because I think that it's particularly important at this point in time to make the distinction between what Stoicism is and what it's not. Because as a lot of good things is often the case with a lot of great things, is that sometimes the wrong people will kind of get hold of it and will kind of use it almost like a doppelganger, and there's this rise of something that is being termed broicism, and it's a very kind of reduced view of what Stoicism is, and it's almost like the dictionary definition of Stoicism with a small s, and it's like being having no feelings and being very emotionless and stoical about things, and it's like very much not what the Stoic teachings are about. I think a good place to start would always be Seneca, because he's such a likable and relatable character, and he has there's a collection, Seneca's Letters from a Stoic, and these are letters that he sent to his friends and family, and giving them just really conversational pieces of Stoic advice. And I found that whenever I've kind of invited like friends or family members to look into Stoic work, they found that one to be really easy and sort of immediately applicable. But again, as you say, I think meditations is just staggering how relevant and useful it can feel right off the bat. But modern Stoicism, I would say, there's a book called The Good Life, and that's by a modern philosopher called William Irvine, and that's a really brilliant kind of modern adaptation of Stoic practices, and he talks about a lot of really great tools in there, including one of my favorites, which is the idea of becoming a setback connoisseur, which is this idea of, in actually enjoying problems as they arise and really going, oh, there's some, I'm really excited to see how I'm going to solve this one,
I love
and I
that.
just love that.
What a fantastic term, setback connoisseur. That's
Well,
amazing.
because I think as a creative, like especially, so much of what we do is problem solving, and a problem so much of the time it's like, oh well, the client's got half the budget that they thought they were going to have for this. That's a setback. Well, okay, how can we make this project amazing with half the budget, or if we've got half the time, there's another setback, or maybe, there's limitations in the brief that we weren't expecting, and actually seeing them as an invitation to really step up and, work those kind of creative muscles it's a lovely kind of, and that's just applying it within, the creative work that we do, but it's a great sort of, you know, call to apply that in life in general as well, I think.
I think so, and and as I alluded to, and as you touched upon, things like AI that are transforming things at a pace that's perhaps unprecedented. We're all having to move on our feet to a degree, or consider the humanity in what we're doing, and the value that's going to almost, move along with that. And I think all of this, that, what's the famous one, Marcus Aurelius, what stands in the way becomes the way. It's that mindset of this is going to work out for the
Totally.
better. And,
Yeah.
and I do have agency in the decisions I make moving forward now in my practice, in my life. So it's about, finding the mental clarity and strength to pause, to not freak out, and to respond rationally, which is what a lot of these teachings are about.
Yeah, completely. I think that quote is such it sums up so much of what Stoicism is about in a nutshell, that kind of idea of the impediment to action advances the action. And again, like that is that is what creative problem solving is. And it's what like I say, ultimately life is, a series of problems, you just that seem to come at you in an endless stream. And so yeah, that the obstacle is very much, it is the way through. It's a case of finding, how am I going to tackle this, rather than something that you've got to in some way dodge or avoid. It's that thing of, sort of stepping up to that and seeing it as a welcome challenge.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's a mantra for our times. Well, this has been a Beautiful conversation, Owen. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Same here. Same here.
And where can people check out Abby and Owen?
Yeah, so if it's abbyandowen.com, a random story about that. When we first started the business, we launched the website the same week that The Last of Us 2 came out, which hugely popular video game with two characters called Abby and Owen in it, and with a very notorious sex scene in the middle of the game. And at the time, we couldn't have planned that, setback. It's one of those things fully outside of our control, and we thought it would be disastrous, but it just resulted in loads of unexpected traffic to our website and turned out to be quite a good thing. So, so it's abbyandowen.com. If you can get past the Last of Us memes, you will find us. It's been lovely chatting with you, Ben.
Yeah, you too, mate. Thank you very much for taking the time. Let's keep in touch. You're a very interesting guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I will be watching keenly what you get up to next.
I appreciate it, Ben. See you later. Bye-bye.
Take care, mate. Bye-bye. Big thank you to Owen Smith for taking the time out of his schedule to join the Creative Condition podcast, one of many, many guests. And it's quite funny on the numbers. If you look at the official numbers, I think we're 294 with this episode. But the truth is, there have been so many side episodes and monologues that I haven't numbered in between that we are actually over 400 episodes for this show now across 11 years. So if you've been a part of that, I cannot thank you enough. This is a labour of love. This is a part of my bigger cause in my life to elevate creativity standing in our societies and cultures. I'd love to be a tiny cog in that process. If I can leave this earth and know that creativity is better respected than when I came to it, then I consider that a job well done, a life well lived, and that's what I'm here for, to help you guys understand your own creativity, make sense of your own story. If you want to work with me one-to-one on that front, I am also a story and creativity coach, so I've got a new offer, which is telling your story. That might be writing a book. I can book coach you, I can ghostwrite, I can write the book for you. I wrote Hector Ayuso's in the form of a 6,000 word short story. Helping another prominent designer at the moment in more of a book coaching role, helping get the stories out of him, interviewing, asking the right questions, and then he's going away and writing up the final passages. Very, very exciting stuff. I'd love to work with you. If not, I've got my flagship pit stop session, which I'm revamping at the moment. So give me a shout. Get in touch. We can work one-to-one, in person, remotely. It depends where you are and what's best for you as a person. But thanks again to Owen. Do check out Abby and Owen. You can find them abbyandandOwen.com. For their portfolio and get in touch with them. What a wonderful conversation. So Stoicism and, being active in your own rescue. What a great phrase, what a great term, and what a great need for that in our times today. So I hope you got something from the show. If you did, let me know. I'm at ben@bentalent.com on email. I'm old school like that. I will pick up the Instagram messages eventually. I will get the LinkedIn stuff. It's just a little slower. I'm trying to just take that tech noise out of my life to elevate and nourish my creativity somewhat. But there you have it. Big thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X. Check out their global range of illustration and animation portfolios at illustrationx.com. Also have a look at the paradisoinstitute.org. That's just paradisoinstitute.org. A wonderful battle for bigger voices, bigger leadership and bold creativity in our industry. You can join them now. Go and have a look at all what they're up to. It's wonderful stuff. And Ukrainian Institute, supporting the embattled Ukrainian creative community in this horrible time of war, ui.org.ua. A few episodes back, I talked to Simon and Rich from All Flows and Pooleyville. Head to allflows.live for this year's festival. Grab yourself a ticket in Milton Keynes. Some incredible speakers on over a few days. You've got Rob Draper, who I saw talking at Off Festival a couple of years back. We've got Jonathan Barnbrook, who I wrote about in my dissertation. We've got Pip Jamieson, we've got Annie Atkins. We've got so many great speakers. Olivia Arthur, brilliant lineup. They're doing great work on a local scale, so get yourself over to Milton Keynes. Not too far, stone's throw from London if that's where you are. Right, anyway guys, I'm going to love you and leave you. Thank you for tuning in for another week. Back to either a diary or a monologue next week, and then we've got some great new guest episodes coming up. We've got Micah Purnell and Harris coming up to talk about Tethering Presence, their incredible book documenting people on or with the implied presence of smartphones in New York and London. Beautiful project. We're going to talk about themes behind all of that stuff. Have a great week. Stay creative, guys.